good. So the three advice monsters that actually was in, Michael references it was in his original book called The Coaching Habit. And he realized that he sort of struck on something that people could resonate with. And so he extrapolates more on that in the book, The Advice Trap. And he talks about these three kind of monsters, that's what he wants to use, but, mindsets, traits, whatever you want. But, some of us show up with a real tell it advice. So, I see it and I'll tell you what you need to do. Others see someone struggling and feel compelled to save them. I can't bear to see anyone struggle. And then there are those who don't want to see anyone struggle at all, so it's better if I just hold on to everything and just control everything, micromanage, whatever it might be. What we'd like you to consider is this. So if you've got your pen and paper there, or just a mental note, is draw the Venn diagram here with each of those monsters, each of those ways of giving advice in each of the circles. So tell it, save it, control it. And what we'd like you to consider is who in your world, and you might think of this professionally and personally, but obviously we predominantly perhaps professionally, but feel free to go elsewhere with it as well. But who would fall into each of those areas in that Venn diagram for you? So what I mean by that is, who do you know in your world who you just think, you save them, you can't bear to see them struggle. And on reflection, in the cold light of day, you can think of times where you've just stepped in and you've just gone, you know what, it's just easier for me to do it. You take it easy, have the afternoon, whatever, blah, blah. I'll rescue this situation. Are there people who you feel you need to tell them everything? Like, seriously, the irony, of course, is you get really frustrated because they never seem to have any of their own ideas. But then you perpetuate that by telling them more. Or to what extent do you feel you just need to control people? Here's the program, here's the stuff, just get that done. And then, of course, are there people who fall, they're not explicitly in one or the other. Perhaps they might, you have to tell them, save them, or maybe they're right in the middle and they're just, you really, for want of a better word, perhaps micromanaging that situation, all the time. And they would be right in this middle section here. Just for a moment, and when I say a moment, what do you reckon? A couple of minutes?
A couple of minutes, yeah.
Just take a couple of minutes. We'll just flick our camera off, and then when we come back on, you'll know it's time. But just a couple of minutes. Who or what kind of situations? What are the people in your world, and where would they go with regards to that Venn diagram when you're thinking of you as the advice giver? There's an interesting exercise to do here as well, where you might think, who puts you in those areas as well? So you feel free to go there as well. Is there someone who feels compelled to rescue you all the time, control you all the time, or tell you all the time? That in itself can give an interesting perspective to then say, okay, well, who do I then do that to, perhaps as a result of this or whatever? There's no, it's just an interesting little exploration to see where we might go here. So 2 minutes, I reckon, and we'll poke our heads back up on screen when that 2 minutes is up. God. Okay, folks, if we're going to just bring you back for a sec. So how did you find that? Are there people who you have managed to allocate a little spot in the Venn diagram?
Tell us a bit about it, Jean. Seeing you having a nod there. We were just discussing the idea that people in our personal lives are an easy one to start with because it might seem a bit more obvious. But so, as Dan said, feel free to go professional or personal. How did you find the experience, Jen? What did you notice about what you did?
When you guys were talking about it and setting us up for the exercise, I straight away went to the personal, to one person in particular who is definitely fits in the save it category for me. But what I noticed as I was filling it out, and I was purposely trying to think of the staff at work, and one of the interesting things that came up for me was that I think I respond differently, like it's definitely differently depending on who the person is. And then I wonder whether or not that is how they see me. So people who I think that I go into the save it advice monster as, I wonder or not whether or not that's what they're coming to me for, to be saved, because that potentially tends to be what I might do with them. Was a wondering that I had as I was filling it out. There's some of only one person sort of struck me as sitting in the whole three, like in the middle, that I thought depending on where that person is at, depends on how I might respond to them. And sometimes that's it for me, depending on how they come with the advice that they're wanting. Because sometimes they come differently, like Emery said, you know, if they come at the end of the term, they're a totally different person to who they potentially are at the beginning of the term, or their manner is, they're totally the same person, but the way that they approach things is different. So yeah, that was just interesting wondering while I was doing the exercise.
I think your language is really interesting there too, Jean. It's an interesting wondering. Because this is exactly what this activity is really about. It's about just sort of shining a bit of light on these interactions that we have quite unconsciously. And, you know, wondering, you know, just putting a bit of light on that and saying, okay, well, how's that actually playing out for me and how's that playing out for them? If I've got somebody trapped in that middle spot there, is that a good thing? And, you know, maybe it's a bit of both. And we're going to explore that shortly as well. Thanks, Jane. Others?
It was interesting, like, just to think about it, because I came up with one that was like, yeah, actually, I'm with saving her all the time. Like, she'll come to me with this problem, like, and she, really expects, I guess, that I'm going to fix it for her. And I thought, it was really good just to think about that and go, oh, what should I be doing instead, so she's just not relying on me to try to fix it all the time. So, oh yeah, she is one that I'm saving quite a bit. And then it was different situations as well. Like as Jean said, depends. There's different people in different situations. You might be saving them more or controlling them more. So it was good just to think about it.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Krista. Others?
I was thinking about my eldest daughter, who's 16, and I try really hard not to give her advice, to ask her questions, but she's quite smart. And she kind of goes, I think she sees asking the questions as a passive aggressive way of trying to control her or tell her or save her. It just got me kind of reflecting on that, because that has been something that I've consciously been doing this year. I've literally said to her, I'm not going to give you any advice. I'm really trying hard. And if I do, you can say, are you giving me advice? In a snarky voice, and I'll pull my head back in. So you have to ask for it. And then it just kind of made me think about my motivation with that. And then kind of going from there to think about our staff. Again, that thing of actually adults are just bigger children in a way, in that same kind of situation. And I feel like sometimes I don't ask people questions wondering if it's going to be perceived as being condescending, as Kieran, because when my 16-year-old would just roll her eyes at me when I asked the question, sort of like, okay, I don't really feel like getting that from my colleague who's but I think that is just about how it's delivered, and that there's some confidence working on in that space, I think, just to become more more confident and at ease with doing that.
You touched on something interesting there for me. Something that struck me there was this idea of your motivation. And I'm guessing that with a 16-year-old hormonal daughter, you're treading on eggshells the whole time, and so it's slightly different to perhaps working with some of your colleagues, but maybe identical to working with some of your colleagues as well. But if we can check ourselves a little bit on our motivation as well, because as Dan alluded to earlier, I think often what happens in the environments that you're perhaps working in, in pressurized situations of schools, we want some fairly immediate actions. We want some immediate responses, and often see ourselves as someone who's more capable of making those things happen immediately. Whereas with your 16-year-old daughter or whoever, maybe we're prepared to play a slightly longer game. And I wonder if we're less inclined to give advice if we're happier to play a longer game and allow people to work things out a little bit for themselves. I don't know. It's just something that... because sometimes our motivation, as you touched on, is we need to do something now here.
Yeah. I think, and sometimes there's some of that, you worry about the kids in a situation where, like, how much time do you give people to work things out for themselves? And obviously it all depends on different scenarios, but because sometimes what the children need is behind it, and it's sort of like, actually you just need to do something. Because I think it's definitely a motivation thing, but I think this has really kind of made me think as well. I'm going to be honest and say there are times, I think, with some staff, I've just thought, I'm just going to tell you to do this, and I am going to micromanage it, because actually I'm feeling like I don't want to spend my time on coaching you. Like, there have been, there are some staff that I have been in that space with, and that's really made me think about that and how fair that is. I know that I would feel appalled if any of my teachers said that they were not going to put the time in to coach a particular child because of whatever reason, So it is the same. It is exactly the same thing.
It's an interesting conflict for you, isn't it? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we talk about in the podcast is we're not saying advice is bad. That's just, but the point is saying, okay, well, when might holding back your advice be more powerful in building confidence and capacity in people? So I can remember doing a workshop with a group of principals where we'd spent the whole morning talking about this and working through one of our coaching models and that kind of stuff. And one of the principal's phones goes and she runs out the room And it was funny because it was this particular person had been talking about, I just tell people what to do and this and that. Anyway, and she comes back in and she goes, before you start, I had to tell them what to do. There was a bloke on the ground with a knife. And we decided that wasn't the time for a coaching conversation. So what do you think the biggest challenge for you here is? What's the ideal outcome for you here, right? It was a case of, no, this is what you need to do. This is the lockdown, bang, bang, bang. And so I think a bit of the artistry of leadership is recognizing the moments when, for one, if you to an extreme, so a crisis, that's not a time for a coaching conversation, right? The time for the coaching is when you recognize something like Kieran brought up before. It's the same. It's not necessarily the same parent, but it's this person obviously has an issue around whatever it might be, communicating issues, having those trickier conversations. Those are the moments. Those are the times where you say, okay, well, this is where coaching can be really useful here for a long-term development, which you're going to need to address if you're going to be, one, an effective leader, but also two, help them become more effective. So I think that's really one thing, recognizing the moments. And then the other thing, and this speaks specifically to Anne-Marie, is when, and because you didn't say this, but this is how I would paraphrase it. There's a separation between the leader you want to be and how you're leading certain people. And that moment of insight is, I believe, a great opportunity to say, now I've got a choice. Do I want to continue that? Because prior to that, in the heat of the moment, you've not got that insight. You just do your job, just do it, right? But in a cold light of day, when you're looking at a beautiful scenery in Queenstown, chatting to some, great people online, in the cold light of day, you get that insight. And so I think you have this choice and say, okay, well, I'm recognizing this now. Now I've got a choice. And then it's about being more deliberate, a bit like what you mentioned before about having this thing on your shoulder, so it was around the Dunning-Kruger effect, and just being mindful. We use the word mindful a lot, right? It doesn't necessarily just mean, well, it definitely doesn't just mean sitting, meditating, listening to guided tracks. It means being really having clarity and being aware and being deliberate about what we're doing. And for me, if I was working with you one-on-one, that would be something that we'd absolutely, that's it. We've found our space that we want to go to and say, all right, well, to what extent can you hit reset on your relationships with those people? On what extent can you hit reset on your motivations around those people, and then deploy some of the thinking here when it comes to those people to start rebuilding? And this is the end of my monologue. If we then bring in what Kristen spoke about and say, well, let's say you do have someone who keeps coming to you and you keep saving them. There's a fair chance, they might not verbally say this, but there's a fair chance they kind of like that, right? And
become dependent on it.
They become dependent, but they become dependent on it, they expect it, they like that. And so the moment you start going, so tell me more about the situation, or have you thought, the point is they won't like that, and there's going to be this moment of tension which might last a little while, which then, because here's the thing, of course, you go, oh geez, it's just easier to tell her, because then now I'm not dealing with the tension and the problem gets solved. But again, in the long run, you're just creating more stuff for yourself. So I think recognizing that any change is hard. Just an individual change is hard, but when there's other people involved, when there's people coming to you and expecting something and you actually give them something other than what they expect, there's going to be a moment of tension. And as I say, that moment can last for a while until they realize, until they feel, the most powerful thing they can feel is that uptick in capacity. And that might take a while, but as soon as they feel that and they get that, and then it can happen. It's just how long are you willing to stay in that tension?
Yeah. And the alternative to that resetting that you're just talking about there, Dan, is what we've all probably done, and probably all done it equally unsuccessfully, which is waiting for that person who's driving you nuts, who you have to micromanage, to leave or die. And both of those things don't happen on the time scale that we'd like them to happen.
We've got a different workshop on that.
Yeah,
Actually,
we do. That's on the dark web. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because when you say, well, they're never going to change, I've just got to put up with it. And, you know, the resetting thing, that tension is interesting. I know Dan's told this story before about his own wife who says, you know, don't you, you know, they're having a conversation. She goes, don't you try that coaching shit on me. You know, I know exactly where you're going with this. Stop asking questions.
Just tell me.
Just tell me. So yeah, there is that awkward tension. There is that not awkward tension necessarily, but there's that transition time where you say, well, I'm actually going to reset. I'm going to reestablish my relationship with you. You know, and this is, you're saying this to yourself, but you know, this is, I've always told you what to do. I've micromanaged you, but it's not working for me or for you. Maybe now we're going to change that, and it will be because they have become reliant on this relationship that you've previously had. Interesting. Kieran and Courtney, I think we're still waiting to hear from you.
I was just going to jump in there because what you said there, Tim, really resonated with me, because I had this situation 12 months ago. And I got to a point where I thought, like, I'm sick of complaining about the same situation, and I have to do something differently to change the way I respond to it. So I did, and it's been really hard because it has really shifted the relationship, and it is awkward, and there is a lot of tension, and it's almost like I really have to think consciously not to let myself drop back into the saving. So, you know, because you have to kind of ride out the tension, and it's been 12 months, the tension's not gone. And it's uncomfortable, but I have to keep reminding myself I think it's the best thing. So I just have to be prepared to ride it out. So, and that's easier to do sometimes in different contexts than it is in other contexts.
Absolutely. Thanks, Courtney. Scally.
What I gained from putting the names in is, I guess initially I would have thought that I fit more into a talent to most people, but when I'm adding names, my list in the Save It is actually has more people in it. So, you know, I guess I've started to think about Save It in a different way, whereas originally I was thinking about it in someone comes to me, I give them an answer, that's talent. Well, no, I'm actually saving them by giving them advice or giving them a solution for something. And I think the more I think about it, the more it's really being detrimental to those people, because most the people in the list are all new to leadership roles. And so by me just jumping out and giving them those solutions or that advice, they're not being able to reflect and develop themselves. So even though I'm saving them, it's really not saving them at all. It's actually probably making, not for the immediate, but long term, it's going to make things a lot harder for them. And so I think, within that, I need to sort of step back a little bit more and start to ask more of those questions, more than just, saving straight away and saying, oh no, you need to do this, or you should have done that.
I'm interested to know, are there names of people in your life who you could immediately put outside of that Venn diagram? So not people who you don't give a shit about and you don't want to save and give them advice, but I mean people who are close to you, either professionally or personally, who actually you don't feel the need to tell, control, or save. Whose names would fall outside of that Venn diagram? Just take a moment, again, just to think about that. Again, I might even just switch the camera off just for 1 minute, just to give you a moment to think on that. Who falls outside that? Who do you not feel the need to tell, save, or control? Okay, folks. So who sits outside the Venn diagram?
For me, I think most could. The only ones, I think the majority of people I have in here could probably sit outside because they don't need to be told or saved.
Yeah, I'm not saying, just to be clear, Kieran, I'm not saying who could, because they all could. Who currently
Yeah.
does? In your life, who currently do you not feel the need to do this for? Or maybe another way of thinking is, who's right on the outskirts of the Venn diagram? You know what I mean? Like if there were degrees of this.
I guess one person for me is I'm in a situation where I work with my wife, and she's definitely not in any of them because she wouldn't listen to me. She wouldn't take it anyway. So that's one person.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. We can explore that a little bit later, Kieran. It's interesting because when we were just discussing it off air, I also put my wife there, but interesting looking at what the reasons are for why that is the case. Others, what did other,
Yeah.
who else do you have outside?
I really struggle to find anyone, but I put my husband and I put my dad. That's all I could think of.
Yeah. He put his dad.
Yeah, that was it.
So we might come back to this as well, because
Yeah.
as Dan said, I put my wife and my dad, and the reasons became very clear to me once I did it. And I don't want to preempt what anyone else is going to say, so we might save it for a minute. But interesting, to start to think about why you've put that person there. What are their characteristics? What's your relationship? Courtney?
I had a few people there actually, like a few people that I work with, and also my mum and my sister. So, but a few like people that I work closely with at work, and yeah, I would put them there too.
You? Christine or Anne?
So I had my learning support teacher that I work closely with, like we share our same office, and just because like we can actually debrief to each other. I never have to give her advice, like I'm never there saving her or telling her. It's just like that she has a listening ear, and we can actually talk about anything really, that with her everything's confidential, like I won't leave that room, and I'm never need, she doesn't fit into any of those things. And then also my husband and then my mum, like outside the school. But yeah, definitely there was one person at school that does not fit in that circle.
Thank you. Anne-Marie?
I actually had a few people from school that were outside there, which I did originally. And yeah, that was, so I've kind of been stuck in my head about thinking, why were they, why were they immediately right outside there, and what's my relationship with them, and why, just why. I was stuck in the why loop there for a bit. So I got nothing else on that.
Yeah, but that's a
Still
good
stuck
loop.
in the loop.
That's a good loop. So just even if there was like one word that might get the ball rolling in that loop, why are they outside the Venn diagram?
I think one of the things that they've all got in common is also that they are people that I feel like would ask my advice, but wouldn't necessarily take it, if you know what I mean. Like they would listen and be discerning and think about how it applies. Because like some people in whatever kind of dynamic you have with them will at times go, oh well, that's what she told me to do, I should definitely do it because she she gave me that advice. Where I much prefer people who will go, what do you think? And I'll go, you could try this, you could try this. I would probably in that situation do this, but then not expect them to do that, like to actually just use that as a catalyst for them making their own decisions.
More of a brainstorm.
So, independent.
Just adding to the repertoire of possibilities.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I really value like collaborative thinking. So I think that's where I find it difficult at times with the advice giving thing, because I tend to put my ideas out there and give advice, but really wanting people to challenge them, really wanting people to ask more questions and go, but what about because that's how I like to think.
So do you find sometimes you put your ideas out there and then say something, so what do you think? And most people go, yeah, sweet.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Not so much.
Be careful. He's leading you down a path here, Anne-Marie.
Totally is. I can tell.
Crap.
but
yeah, we use a what I'm aiming for at our school. So I'm a philosophy for children educator, and the community of inquiry model is very much about collaborative thinking and challenging, and that's, like I say, that's the space that I love. That's the space I like to be in, and trying to get people into that space. I think our team is much better at that now, but there's still, it was funner when I wasn't the boss.
Yeah.
You know, because yeah.
I mean, it's such a common,
Yeah.
it's such a common phenomenon, without question. As soon as the boss says something, even if it's something along the lines of, I'm not sure, but I'm wondering if, or, you know, what do you guys think? It doesn't matter what you say if you say it first. If you say it first, then the only sensible answer from anyone underneath is, yeah, sweet. Right. And I know that's, I mean, that's a huge generalization, but that is, it's such a common phenomenon that, you know, I've lost count of the amount of people who say things, I just don't get any pushback. And it's like, well, what are they pushing back? You know, so I tell them what I think, and then I want pushback. It's like, well, it's not, most sensible people realize that pushing back against the boss isn't what gets you ahead, right? Even though actually it is, right? Even though the boss is actually saying, I really want your ideas, everything they've learned since they were a kid was, who's the strongest signal in the room? Let's agree with them. And so it's quite interesting, again, given that we have all these different protocols and ways of being with young people when we're trying to elicit ideas. And, you know, the thought that we might say, hey, let's think, pair, share it with teachers. Like, are you kidding? You know, like how, you know, and it's, but no, let's do that. But maybe you don't call it that, but bringing in the different kinds of approaches that you would have. And that's why it's interesting, you know, I think you were talking about collaborative inquiry before, you know, in the schools, like bringing in protocols that actually mean that we're really aware and deliberate in, well, when am I going to voice my opinion or my ideas? And the best time usually is last. You know, usually, if you're serious about eliciting all the opinions and making sure that we have this throwaway phrase that, you know, dissent is welcome until we make a decision. So that's like a team norm that we'll toss this around and until we feel that everyone's at least been heard. But once we then make a decision, then that's it. You know, there's no going about say, oh, well, I fought for this, or I didn't want this to happen. So working as a team is quite an interesting one. But that idea of trying to elicit feedback, pushback, whatever you want to call it, it's so common. And it's one thing that takes time because people become dependent on it. Have you got any questions? No, of course we don't. It's 5 o'clock at night. We're going home. You know, does that make sense? Of course it does. Because if I put my hand up and say it doesn't make sense, I'm going to look stupid now. Because you asking, does it make sense, implies that it's fairly obvious. So there's different throwaway lines that we use that we're not mindful of, which imply, even though we're saying we want feedback, they imply we don't. We imply that this is actually what we're doing. So it's just an interesting way of thinking about how you talk to the group and how you bring up opinions and ideas.
Yeah, it might be interesting for you. I don't think we'll explore it any further here, but it might be interesting just as a thought exercise for each of you. Those names that you put outside the Venn diagram, maybe list a couple of words that you think describe how you feel about that person and their capabilities. It might be interesting to see what sort of characteristics, what relationship, what characteristics that you see that person having, or relationship you have with them, and then saying, oh, okay, so what about the people who are in the Venn diagram? Why do I have such a different relationship with them? What are the characteristics I see them having that has me trapping them inside of those tell it, save it, controllers?
What we'd like to do is, whilst this is all percolating around, is put you back into your groups and just think of our favorite question is, what do you need to stop doing or let go of in order to help people move to the outside of that Venn diagram? So what do you need to stop doing or let go of, or start doing, whatever, maybe, but what do you need to change about how you're showing up in order to help people move to the outside of that Venn diagram? And we're going to give you a couple of the same rooms. And yeah, we're going to give you 10 minutes in there to talk about this, whatever's come up for you. But the question is, what do you need to stop doing or let go of? And then we'll come back at about in 10 minutes time and we'll hear from each of you. And then we'll be on our way. Okay.